Man, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now. As I said on my last podcast, you know, um, I have an important topic I think that people need to understand. Keith Lamont Scott. Now, this is the young man, or the 43-year-old man, who was shot and killed in Charlotte, North Carolina. They said he had a gun. Some people said he had a book. They said, there's conflicting stories. I've seen the video, and I didn't see a gun, and then I saw a gun. That's just plain and simple is what I'm going to tell you. I didn't see a gun, and then I saw a gun. But this is something that I noticed that the news likes to do. And now I Googled man in Charlotte killed. And the first 4 things that came up out of Google, I'm going to read them to you. I'm not going to read the articles, but I'm going to read the first 4 things that came up. Fox News reports, Charlotte man shot by police, allegedly stabbed wife, threatened to kill family, documents show. ABC News, court document, black man killed by cops had threatened wife. All right, let me see if there's any other news streams of this. Okay, so those are the first 2, ABC News and Fox News. ABC News and Fox News are the first 2 to report this, because I'm seeing that ABC News reported this 11 hours ago. And today, at the time of this recording, it's Wednesday. I never really get the date, but I have to give the date on this. It's Wednesday, September 28th. This will be uploaded on the 29th, but I have to actually tell you the time that this has been, reported. So now I'm going to click on the article from the Fox News. Keith Lamont Scott, the 43-year-old North Carolina man, shot and killed after a confrontation. Now, always pay attention to the words. They said a confrontation with Charlotte police. Now, let me explain to you what a confrontation means. Pay attention to the words, people. You have to pay attention to these words. The definition based on dictionary.com, a meeting of persons face to face. Now, I'm going to look up the word confront, being that that's where it comes from. And just real quickly, it says to face in hostility or defiance, oppose, to present for acknowledgement, contradiction, set face to face. Okay, so now I had to read those definitions because pay attention to the words that these people use. Now, again, let's go back to confrontation. Now, most people who have seen this video know that Keith Lamont Scott was in his vehicle. So he didn't confront anyone. He was sitting in his vehicle. They came up on him. So that's already a falsehood. Understand how to read these things. So, all right, it says the man shot and killed after a confrontation with Charlotte police, allegedly stabbed his wife, hit one of his children, and threatened to kill his family, his wife claimed in multiple requests for domestic violence protective orders, one of which she filed last year. She is the one who filmed the video. Now, I'm not defending anything he's done or what he did or what he said. And I understand that, but they're still together, and she already took the steps to notify the police. So that shows a lack of fear. Like she's not going to notify the police and then all of a sudden get fearful and say, come back into my life. Once she invited the police into the situation, she showed that she didn't have really any fear. It's not like some wives that are afraid and abused and they don't reach out to the police. She reached out to the police. Okay. I found this section. It says in October 2015, she wrote, he hit my 8-year-old in the head a total of 3 times with his fist. He kicked me and threatened to kill us last night with his gun. He said he is a killer and we should all know that. She also said he carried a 9mm handgun but did not have a permit for it. Now, by the way, in North Carolina, I've found information that says you don't need a permit, but I'm not really sure. I have to find out. Now, there's something strange about this story. It says both orders were ultimately dismissed when Scott's wife said he no longer poses a threat to the family. Now, I'm going to stop right there as far as reading that. I'm not going to read the ABC one, because the ABC is probably saying the exact same thing. You know, if he actually physically abused them, why didn't charges be brought against him? I'm kind of confused. Now, I don't know North Carolina law, but I know in New York City, if someone says you hit them, they arrest you. Once the report is made, it's not even in your hands. I just find it strange that he can do these things and not get arrested. But look, I'm not defending him. I'm just talking about the law. I just want to know one thing. Did the cops know this information before they arrived on the scene, or when they arrived on the scene and had this alleged confrontation with this man? Did they know this? Were they privy to this information? I notice anytime when, especially black people, when they get killed, they'll go in the past to find something to sully the person's name. And I always ask the question, even if you don't like this guy, even if you think he was a jerk for doing what he did to his kids, you know, again, I say if, because I just don't really know any physical abuse that's reported to the police that's just not taken to court. But I don't have all the information. I'm just saying it's just peculiar. That's all I'm saying. Just pointing out the differences. No emotion here, just pointing out the differences. But the thing is, this is what I want to know. First of all, does his past and what happened last year, because I thought this was like, when they mentioned it, to me, it would have been relevant, if a little relevant, slightly relevant, if it had happened this year, like maybe last week. Then it would play to his psyche right now. But you're talking about something last year, right? And when them officers cannot say they knew his history when they arrived on the scene. But you got ABC News reporting it. You got Fox News reporting it. I'm sure other media outlets are going to report it. By the time you hear this podcast, everybody's going to report this. And I realized in America, we have to be perfect victims. You know, like a lot of people don't know, Rosa Parks is celebrated. I mean, and rightfully so, because she was a part of the movement. But the original person was Claudette Colvin. That was the original person. And the thing was, Claudette Colvin wasn't the perfect victim. She wasn't the perfect victim. She was a teenager who was pregnant by a married man. So they end up using someone who is a perfect victim. First of all, this shows bias and racism in its fullest. We have to have perfect victims to get any justice, and then we might get justice. You know, so that was a bit of propaganda, which is the topic of today's episode, propaganda. See, as I'm speaking, I'm noticing more outlets are putting his violent past. So again, the propaganda has began against Keith Lamont Scott. Now, apparently, he made amends with his wife, and he never got arrested for that situation. So anyway, this brings me into my topic. And my topic today is propaganda. Understanding propaganda and how dangerous propaganda is. Now, the definition of propaganda is as follows. And this is from Google. Because like I always tell people, you could just Google information nowadays and you can check it against other sources. I know the definition, but I'm going to read it from Google. And it says, information, especially of a biased or misleading nature. Let me repeat that. Propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Okay? Propaganda is information, especially of a biased nature. Dictionary.com. Let's just have fun with this. Let's just read another, just to get the clarity. Propaganda, as according to Dictionary.com. Information, ideas, or rumors deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, group, movement, institution, nation, etc. To the deliberate spreading, meaning number two, the deliberate spreading of such information, rumors, etc. So I'm going to just stop right there because I just wanted to read that definition. Now, I'm going to give you examples of propaganda. The first one I gave you was the example of propaganda against Keith Lamont Scott. And the reason for them mentioning his past was to discredit him. That was the purpose of that propaganda. So now I'm going to read to you the different types of propaganda. Not all of them. I'm just going to read a few. Testimonial. You know how sometimes you see infomercials and people giving testimony to a certain product, but they work for the company or they're paid by the company. That's almost like commercials. That's a form of propaganda. Basically, they have an agenda and they're trying to explain it to you. You know, they're trying to. Or you see testimony. Let's look at the church. The church always has testimonies, but you know at the end of that testimony, you already know where it's going. That's actually propaganda for the church, for God. And if you believe in that, it's not that it's bad. I'm just saying recognize propaganda. Recognize when there's a confirmation bias, okay? Because usually when people tell you testimonies, it's like, oh, especially in church, I was broken down, nothing worked for me, and then I found God. So that's propaganda for the church and for God. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying that's one form of propaganda. Repetition is another form of propaganda. You're seeing this right now when you see the Republicans speak, and basically a lot of people who speak out against justice for black folk, black people, black men and women and children in this country. You know, anytime you mention the police violence, they'll repeat the same thing, and I call them talking points, which talking points is propaganda. They'll say, what about Chicago? Thousands, like Trump just said, thousands of people get killed there. You talk to any person who's against any kind of justice for black people, they will always mention Chicago. You know, and the funny thing is, Chicago's been having problems for a number of years, and I haven't heard these people speaking, so it's disingenuous. What they're saying is true. Chicago does have an issue. But what they're doing is trying to distract you by repeating that over and over again. Also by lumping the cops and the protesters in together. You have to choose a side. You know, we know there's some bad cops. Like, I notice every argument, and this is another thing of propaganda, when people are running for office and things like that, every argument starts off the same way. We have to have justice for the black people. We have to have justice. Hillary Clinton started off that way. We have to have justice for black people. No mention of racism, but we need to have justice for black people. And then they slowly, see, it's almost like they say, let's just say this key word. Now, this is all propaganda. Now, this propaganda is to get black people emotionally involved, because they play to our emotions. So when she says black people have been treated unjustly, and she mentions certain keywords, and understand they got study groups that understand this. But then she pivots because she doesn't want to lose the police. So she pivots over to the police. And she says, but we understand these cops put their lives on the line, and it's a very difficult job. It's a tough job, and not all cops are bad, and we have to treat the cops better, and we need to cooperate. Now, it always starts off positively, black people need justice, and it ends up blaming black people by the end of what she's saying. And that's propaganda, and they will repeat that over and over again. Then at the end result, she'll talk about legislation for the cops. We need more training. We need to invest more money in training, more money in this, more money in that for the cops. All right. Another form of propaganda is name calling. I'm going to speak of Hillary. Hillary did that when she said in the first debate, trumped up, trickle down. That's propaganda, and they're going to use that over and over. Watch, you're going to hear that trumped up, trickle down economics that Trump wants to do. Trumped up, trickle down. Pay attention. Now, so they're going to they're going to use two things. They're going to use repetition and name calling, two types of propaganda. And Trump is going to do the same thing with his name calling. He's already been doing that. Glittering generalities. Now, the generalities, basically, when you take a stat and you say stuff like, well, black people are responsible for most of the crimes in our country. And when you state that black people are responsible for the majority of the crimes in the country, and you look at the stats bore that out. So the stats makes that seem correct. That seems like it's a correct statement. However, when you look a little closer and you realize black neighborhoods are over policed, and when you looked at the stats, a lot of crime is crime to the stats. In other words, if I get a ticket for hopping a train, if I get a ticket for jaywalking, or I get a ticket or I get arrested for robbing somebody, those all go into crime stats. It all goes into crime stats. So when you have an over-policed neighborhood, and they're giving people tickets and arresting people for minor offenses, that goes into the stat numbers. That's looking closer at the situation. That's glittering generalities. You have emotional propaganda. I would say that the masters of this is white women. They will give you them crocodile tears in a minute, and they'll be lying their ass off. They've done it for years when it came to rape and things like that. They'll be lying their ass off, and they'll be tearing up and crying, and even when they get caught doing something, when they caught red-handed, they'll start crying and carrying on and trying to, Another big form of propaganda is imagery. That is a big form of propaganda in the form of TV shows, pictures, right? So those are examples of propaganda. Now, let me tell you who engages in the most propaganda that you'll see. Now, these are just different examples of propaganda, but people pay attention to the news. You know who used propaganda? Sometimes a whole movie is propaganda. Sometimes I watch TV shows. Think about the TV shows that come on about terrorism, like Quantico and Homeland and all of these shows. Just check them out, right? None of these shows are from the point of view of the people where the terrorists live. Like, I think that'll be a very interesting show. Not a point of view of a terrorist, but a point of view of a family who lives amongst terrorists who don't have a choice. Imagine if America, now I give credit, America doesn't do this, but imagine if to catch a killer, in my building, and they know he's in my building, and he killed 50 people, they send a drone and knock down the entire building. That's what they do in these foreign countries. Oh, there's a terrorist in that building. I know his family's there, but it's our only chance to get him. And they'll knock down the entire building and kill children, and hey, we're at war. So when Israel was bombing the Palestinian country, or the Palestine, I always mess that up. When they were doing that, they actually said, matter of fact, I should look it up just to be a little more accurate. Actually, I remember. They said that most of the people killed were innocent. And I'm talking about 70 to 80% of the people that were killed during the time they were bombing Palestine, 80% were innocent. And they said that them cowards were hiding amongst them, so they had to kill. They were exterminating them people. And I could not believe the inhumane nature of America and all the pundits. But they'll never tell a story from the victim's point of view in that situation. Because when you see these TV shows like Homeland and Quantico, these are propaganda TV shows. A lot of people don't know that a lot of these TV shows, they get information from the government in exchange for a particular message. Let me show you another form of propaganda. The LBG, I always get it wrong. I'm just going to say the gay community, gay and transgender community, because I always get the initials wrong, and I want to be respectful. If you look at a lot of these TV shows, I noticed probably about last year, maybe 2 years ago, I started seeing every TV show have gay people in it. Kissing, making love. Look, I don't have a problem with gay people, but I know that wasn't equivalent to life. That's what made me believe that was sometimes there would be gay sex scenes that had nothing to do with the show. And it's become now to a point where you can predict it. And to me, actually, the way they were depicting these gay people, I think was a disservice to gay people. You'll have a straight woman that all of a sudden decides to be gay. You have a straight man all of a sudden decides to be gay. So that kind of goes against the notion that they always say you've been born this way. Or maybe they figured it out. I don't know. I'm not going to even go there because that's not the topic. But I notice, because I go to work every day. I'm in the public. I live in New York City. I don't see gay people in every circle. What I mean is that they're a minority, and really probably of an extreme minority. But that's, what I'm saying is the reason why that you see the propaganda with them in every show basically was for tolerance. So it's not that they're doing it for a bad reason. I'm just saying, pointing out propaganda, and that was propaganda. Anytime you see gay couples on every show, that's propaganda. They're trying to push their agenda forward. Let's go to the news. Again, I already pointed out with Mr. Scott's situation. I remember there was another video that came out about it was a white woman walking through New York street, and it was a propaganda video to show street harassment, because they're trying to get laws passed according to that. Not just laws. See, you gotta understand, propaganda always leads to some kind of agenda or something. So let me give you another example of propaganda. The Iraq War. Before we went to Iraq, there was a whole bunch of talk and hype and propaganda put out there. They have weapons of mass destruction. Just vast lies, and repeating the same thing over and over again till they feel like they got to a point in the level where the American people had enough fear where they can invade Iraq. That was all propaganda. And now we know the truth now. We know that it was all lies. So much so that Colin Powell retired and basically left public life. It was that bad. So propaganda can be very, very dangerous. We all engage in some form of propaganda to get certain things. We do. So intention, and I've learned the only good, the highest good, and the only, I don't know if it's the only, I think it's the highest good, and this is by the philosopher William James. The highest good is a goodwill. A goodwill cannot be tampered with. It's a goodwill. So sometimes the means justify the ends. But again, now let's look at the news media. Propaganda. So let me tell you, the black man and black woman has been propagandized to the highest extent. Ridiculously. To the highest extent, we've been propagandized. We've been criminalized. Our women have been oversexed, shown as just sexual creatures. And the men, aggressive predators and rapists. We've been criminalized. That's what the Jim Crow did. And if you look back in the history, and it's easy to find, we were criminalized right after slavery. These wild animals, just the idea of us. And America's propaganda machine pushes the agendas forward in this country. Understand that. There's a constant fight for your mind. There's a constant fight to influence how you think and act in this country. It's constant. It's unrelenting. Learn how to be a free thinker. Again, I made this podcast, Life Culture Sports, because there's certain things that are really important to me. Obviously, sports. Let's start with that. But culture, and the part of culture that's very important to me is way of life, the way you think. And I'm going to do an episode on that because I always have this question: do you actually think for yourself? And there's only a select few that actually think for themselves. Either they are the leaders, they're a part of a think tank, or they're somewhere alone by themselves. Because propaganda influences your mind and your way of thinking. It tells you what's right and wrong. Let me give you another form of propaganda that a lot of people don't think it is, but it is. And it's a tool of white supremacy. The education system. The way they teach history is propaganda. Not saying it's lies, but they conveniently leave out a lot of truths. They have to tell the truth. When you're in school, they teach you how great the white race is. And this is just from my own education, and now my son's in high school now, his education. The first time they talked about black people was slavery, so we didn't exist until slavery. And they're also trying to change that narrative. And I've heard that the books in Texas, they're trying to say that we were immigrants and Africa had slavery. They're trying to whitewash it. And I think the purpose of this propaganda is because they know they owe us reparations and they do not want to pay it. Because if we were given reparations, it would completely change the scope of life in this country and then all over the world. But that's another story I'm going to get into. Back to the propaganda. The education system teaches white supremacy in the form of history. Now, there's no propaganda in math, because math is math. In skills and engineering and science, there's some propaganda in science. You have to be careful. You have to make sure it's science and not something that's posing as science. But from day one, you're taught that Jesus was white, and every other great invention and every other great accomplishment in this world is white. I mean, I remember growing up learning about Thomas Jefferson, and he's one of the 4 founding fathers of this country. Now that I'm a grown man and I taken African American histories in college, Thomas Jefferson was a racist bastard. His face needs to be taken off of Mount Rushmore. He was a rapist. He was a racist. He was a slave owner. He was damn near the devil. But he wrote an important document, so he's so great. We can't. No, he's a piece of shit, and I'm saying it clearly. Like a lot of the leaders of that time, basically. So, but you're taught this propaganda. You see, they didn't teach the whole truth about Thomas Jefferson, because these are the heroes of white supremacy. You see, and if you tell the truth about the heroes of white supremacy, they won't be heroes as much. Now, to the staunch racist, yes, they will be heroes. But you got to understand, to a little child, a little white child, he's like, wow, I come from greatness. Jesus was white. All the great leaders were white. Even the bad guys were white, Hitler. But the white guys came in and saved them and beat the bad white guy. Slavery was bad. Some really bad white people brought slavery, right? Who saved the blacks from slavery? Good white people. You see, they even condition us so much that even when a white person does the poisoning, they send in a white person with the antidote. And they will not tell you about all the other stuff leading up to it. Like the Haitian Revolution. It's not even taught in the schools. It's not even taught in the schools. They're afraid. There hasn't been no movie about that. And I think that's what would be the most greatest thing that ever happened. Them people fought for freedom. They didn't have weapons. They basically gave up a lot of their lives to get freedom. And they got punished for it by France. That's another story. But again, this is about propaganda, so I want to stick with the propaganda. Oh, I forgot. One of the greatest propagandized stories ever is Tarzan. Now, some people say it's symbolic that the apes were black people. I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to engage in that conspiracy. But always remember, or The Last Samurai. Let's look at that. And these were not even black people. Tom Cruise goes to this ancient land. Goes to this land and becomes the greatest samurai ever. White guy. And the funny thing is, now what's going on is people are starting not to buy the bullshit. They're trying to steal Egypt from us. They know that Egypt has the pyramids. Cleopatra has been made white so many different times. Moses is white. Now, all of these people lived in Egypt. A lot of the old mythical prophets lived in Egypt. But they won't tell you all about your history. So think of it this way, because I'm a little all over the place. So I apologize for this, because this topic it's hard to cover in just 40 minutes, 45 minutes. But I'm going to come to the end on this. But this is what I would say. If you're a black child, or if you're a non-white child, let's put it like that, growing up in this country, getting this education, you're going to feel inferior to whites because of how you're taught from a young age that white people are great and black people exist as slaves, and the good white people freed the black people. And they won't tell you what you were before you came here. They know the history. They won't tell you that. They won't go behind the curtain of, like, when they talk about slavery, they had to take you from somewhere. You know, they won't tell you about that. Oh, another propaganda was, I think it was called F Troop. Cowboys and Indians. The Indians were always the bad guys. We know that history was completely wrong. And I apologize to my audience. I've been jumping around a little bit, but I'm staying on propaganda, but I've been jumping around because there's so much evidence of this. people, there's a strong fight for your mind. You have to be very careful. Have to do your own research. See, this country depends on you being lazy and not doing your own research. And the information's out there until it's not out there anymore. You must do your own research. You must understand what's going on out here. Black children growing up realizing everything white is great. I thought every white person was rich because they don't even show poor white people on TV. So you're sitting around, you think that black people are the only people who use drugs growing up. You don't see a lot of that till you get older. See, this is the thing though. When they teach you white supremacy at a very young age, by the time you are grown up, you have to unlearn all that shit. So the damage is done just about. And if you don't unlearn it, you're going to think what? You're going to think all kind of crazy shit. I heard a black man saying slavery was good for black people. Coming here was the best thing for us. Another thing of propaganda, I'm just pointing out examples of propaganda. Anytime there's a disease in one of the countries, now be clear, let me be clear in this. In one of the countries of Africa, they always say Africa. Okay? Africa's a continent. There are countries within Africa, but they always, if there's some kind of virus or some kind of disease, they will say this disease came from Africa. And it's factually correct, but Africa is a large continent with many countries. But they want to poison, they want the whole Africa to seem like it's poisoned. So they say Africa. And I'm talking about highly educated people saying Africa. But when there's a disease or something coming out of Russia, they don't say Europe. They say Russia. If it's France, they don't say Europe. They say Russia. So, again, I'm saying the same. I'm engaging in some propaganda because I want you to know. I'm going to say this over and over again. Do your own research. Do your own research. Do your own research. There's a fight for your mind and your children's mind, especially your children. They trying to get them young. That's why I always say that a lot of white people don't realize that they are white supremacists, not in the form of racism or racist. They've been taught since a young age that they are superior to everyone else. And a lot of them will disagree with me, but you've been taught this. This is innate. This is in your system subconsciously. So every now and then, that's why white people, when they travel the country and travel the world, they're very comfortable everywhere they go, just about. Because they are the makers of everything according to education. So, I had to talk about this because it's been disturbing me for a while. But this brings us to the end of this episode of Life, Culture, Sports. As a matter of fact, I'm going to name this part 1 of propaganda because I might have to do another one to get, because pay attention to your news stations and things like that. They're paid. It's not news anymore. It's a TV show. So this brings us to the end of Life, Culture, Sports. You can find this podcast on iTunes. You can also go to my website, Life, Culture, Sports. When you're looking for this podcast on iTunes, it's Life, Culture, Sports, no spaces. You can go to SoundCloud. You can find me on SoundCloud under Life, Culture, Sports. You can visit my website, lifeculturesports.com, for additional content. I will be putting up articles and things like that. I'm still adjusting to this, and I'm still getting my format down packed. But again, you can go visit there. I'm going to eventually start throwing up archives of my Knicks home court episodes. I have 9 episodes. I have only posted 2 to iTunes. I'm going to be posting archives as we get closer to the season. I hope this podcast finds you in good health, and I'll speak to y'all later. Peace.